Thanks for joining us for today's Tech Talk webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about security in endpoints.
Go ahead, Emanuel.
So thanks. I wanted to let you go first, but thank you. Emanuel Pirker, I'm the founder and CEO of Stratodesk. I am an engineer by profession, engineer turned founder. That has happened 12, 13 years ago, though, but still I like to be deeply involved in the technology. I guess I can still write code. I'm not sure if everyone in the company likes that when I do that, but I can. And I'm also very interested in home automation and smart home, connected home, IoT. So this is obviously a good time now to talk about these things, attack scenarios and so on. But this is exactly what we will talk about today. So thanks very much for joining. I'm very excited to be here. Tobias, floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm Tobias Kriedl. I'm actually originally an astronomer by vocation and was active in that area for about 15 years. And then switched to IT, and after being at a couple places, ended up for a little over 25 years as a team lead at Northern Arizona University, where I managed our entire end user computing facilities, including the front end servers and storage and network resources and so forth, and became, of course, very interested in all kinds of endpoints, including, of course, both fat and thin clients, as well as virtualization. And of course, with that, obviously, come major concerns about security, which is also a topic that's very dear and important. And I'm very grateful to Emanuel and the folks at Stratodesk for the opportunity to share some of my past experiences now that I'm retired, but still I attempt to be semi-active in the field since it's still very exciting to me, and there's so much going on and so much still to learn and do.
Today, we're going to be talking generally about the security at endpoints, the impact of not securing your endpoints, the impact of some of the vulnerabilities that have happened lately, like the Log4Shell, and what we at Stratodesk have been doing to make sure that our customers are safe. And then we will be talking in general about security, where Tobias will be giving maybe general best practices when it comes to endpoint security and all of that. So the cost of not securing endpoints. Who would like to start, Emanuel or Tobias?
Yeah, I can speak from personal experience because I was actually in North Carolina at the time that this took place, and was one of many, many thousands, tens of thousands of people who found themselves in the situation where they could not find gasoline anywhere. And we were extremely fortunate to just have enough gasoline to be able to make it to the Charlotte airport. And so speaking again from personal experience, seeing this unfold and what the major ramifications were to a very large number of individuals really, I think, heightened the awareness among not only IT professionals, but also average citizens, how critical and how important this is, and how unfortunately ill-prepared so many companies are to handle situations like this, in the sense of neither being proactive nor having any kind of established way of mitigating and dealing with these things after the fact. In other words, lack of planning overall.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you were the one in our prep call where you said this is essentially how thin clients got started, right? Because obviously, if you have an endpoint that has important data, no matter if you use shared files or shared folders, still the endpoint has full access to the data. It can delete the data, and yeah, I mean, this is what you have backups for, but we know how well backups work and how difficult it is to retrieve, and et cetera, et cetera. And so this is how thin clients back in the day, or this whole concept got started.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, you know, as Emanuel was referring to, security is not restricted to any given area. It runs the gamut from the server side, the network, and of course the endpoints. And my understanding is that thin clients became fairly popular within the US Navy on ships because so many devices were shared by so many different individuals that there were concerns about remnants of files and other pieces of information being left on such devices. And of course, you know, the last thing you want to happen anyway is for valuable information to fall in the hands of your enemy. Very recently, many of you probably read about the F-35 jet that is somewhere at the bottom of the China Sea. And of course, there are major concerns, obviously, about the technology on that, should the US not be able to retrieve it.
Yeah, the good news though is about this whole ransomware thing is what I see is from my experience, we get asked about this a lot. So pretty much any kind of customer conversation that happens with our sales team or pre-sales somehow involves ransomware. It may be a driver for people to move towards VDI, of course, or generally people mention it. It is something you talk about. So I guess this Colonial pipeline attack has really made people aware of what this is, this ransomware thing, because it's really something. I mean, had somebody said this to me 10, 15 years ago, I mean, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have dismissed it, because everything is possible, right? We know that whatever somebody can imagine, it will happen somewhere, no matter how bad it is. But that this becomes so widespread, this is really interesting. And we actually don't know how much is happening, right? Because so many things do not get reported. Companies might just quietly settle. And to some extent, this is really interesting. I mean, you mentioned the F-35, and the question is, how much do you actually want from your government to protect you from that kind of attack, especially when it comes from foreign countries? But it seems to be very difficult. Yeah? On one hand, we don't want things like a big firewall that protects the United States. That would be against the idea of an open internet. And of course, that kind of firewall could be abused. But on the other hand, it's really interesting, right, when you think about it. And so actually, to go one point further, sometimes, especially since I'm from this, open source Linux scene and such, I hear this very often, things like, let's use that kind of app. It provides end-to-end encryption, so the NSA cannot see what we are discussing. So yes, I mean, certainly, we don't want that kind of government overreach, but what about foreign governments? At least if you reside in a certain government, no matter if it's the United States, let's say the same happens in Denmark, and you have at least certain ways how to interact. You can sue your own government, but you have little ways of how to deal with hacking or any adverse action that comes from a foreign government, right? As a person, you cannot go to war against Sweden, yeah, or for that matter, Austria, where I'm from. So what that means essentially, the bad news is you are on your own. The world has become a big Wild West. And people from anywhere on this planet can try to attack you, specifically your company, and you are pretty much alone in that Wild West. I mean, really let that sink in for a moment. You are alone.
I think one of the biggest difficulties is that, especially with malware of any sort, is that as long as individuals have the ability to download and access files or install pieces of software, that unless that kind of detection can be done before the user has access to that kind of data, that is either the server side or the network side has to have the intelligence to detect and prevent access to such things, which is kind of the direction I think that some of the newer security software packages are headed towards. Because the second approach, of course, is to put this kind of protection on the endpoint itself. And of course, one of the advantages there is, then, each endpoint, will have its own independent security of sorts. But of course, some of the disadvantages are that the endpoints can only deal with the types of malware that they are aware of. And keeping up with things like, signatures, so that, spyware and viruses and so forth are detected quickly becomes very difficult, because so many types of endpoints depend on being updated on some kind of a regular basis, which means either if it's automated, it may not happen that frequently, or if it's a manual process, people may not take the time and trouble to keep up with it on a regular basis. And so you have that degree of vulnerability that is built into that kind of a system. And this is, of course, what makes endpoints that make use of thin clients and robust operating systems, such as what Stratodesk and other vendors provide, is that you effectively do not have the ability to infect your endpoint because it is a very closed and very secure system.
Yeah, that's right. So the idea of the endpoint, if I remember back the very early days of when this no-touch OS was incepted, so the first conversations I had with customers, one thing was, we don't want open ports. Period. So this thing should be a black hole on the network, and there's no discussion here. And even if you say, we need ports for discovery, etc., well, you can solve discovery in a different management discovery in different ways. I mean, ultimately, it's still the choice of the user, right? Sometimes people have legitimate things where they say, I want to run something, I want some sort of remote management. And so ultimately, a compromise is that we say, okay, we give you the option, you can open, say, an HTTPS port, so your machine can be remotely managed, but we actually suggest don't do it, right? Why, if somebody really wants to do it, okay, I can repaint my car in pink or purple, of course I can, but but by default, I get a set of 10 colors that I choose from when I buy a car. And so I would compare it in that way. And obviously, the principle of being as minimal as possible helps. We have the situation that port scans are happening daily. I guess the audience in this talk is most probably heavily interested in security or system administrators. I mean, if you look in the logs of a public HTTP server, this is crazy, and this has been going on for years. So every IP address in the internet is being scanned on a daily basis. So yeah, one point is we don't want open ports, even if it's in your private network. But so kind of finding the bridge to the slide, we have put this log4shell here on this second slide, because it's very important, because it's new. It's a very bad security hole, but this is actually something that works without attacking an open port in the sense you have a service, which of course, any kind of web service, which of course implies an open port. But you use that web service, you just supply a certain string, which all sounds good, right? And AI might not feel something weird. You don't even need a specific pattern of scanning or something. But in this string that you have in there that you supply to this API, you put a few magic characters, and these magic characters make, and I don't know if everyone really knows how mean that log4shell really is, because it makes then the server, the attacked server, to download something from a third-party site that you can set up yourself, which supplies something really, really mean. And since this really, really mean is a Java class, since it's Java, you don't need to worry. Do I need to supply an ARM binary, an x64 binary? You don't have these issues. You supply a Java class, and this Java class can then do whatever it wants, potentially continue scanning in that network, finding other targets, then specifically see a certain Windows version that you can attack over some service because they have some software installed. And so this goes on and on. For somebody who has the time and the desire to get into some kind of network, I think once you have that open door, there is little to prevent that from happening. Honestly, if you think about government-sponsored hackers, or even potentially private sector spies, if they have the time and the resources, then this is terrible. So when this log4shell came up, I mean, obviously no touch OS, the endpoint, so we knew that this is a Linux OS that doesn't run Java, but the management software, pretty much every software piece in Java uses log4j. So this tool log4j, I know it myself, it is really cool. I have often asked myself, can I have the same thing in XYZ? Substitute your favorite programming language whenever I do something. So in Python are decent logging mechanisms that are very similar. You can write a statement like logger.debug, and then depending on that logger object that goes somewhere. So if you start up something new in whatever kind of language, what is the logging? And still so many people these days write printf statements, and which is a pain. I mean, then sometimes you end up with a certain segment of code that has 30 printf statements that you then remove. 2 weeks later, you have to revisit that section of code. Then you want to slap yourself because you removed all your debug statements. So having something as clean and nice from an API level, from a configurability level, from an extensibility level, like log4j, this is extraordinary. And I guess this is why it has become so popular. It has become the default log tool or logging mechanism for Java. Now finding something in there and something that has that kind of bad implication, I mean, is certainly terrible. I guess this is the security hole of the decade. And you know what's really making things worse is this has been out there in the wild for years, for 10 years. We don't know, and nobody knows who has known about this. Now, the only thing from a personal perspective, from a selfish perspective, if you run your JDK, a certain version of the JDK with certain default settings, it will not do the remote code execution. So we found that out pretty quickly. You can kind of trigger that it tries, but then the remote code execution just don't happen because it won't download anything. So that means, yeah, in the media, of course, they have hyped it a lot, but pretty much everyone with a certain version of Java 11 point something upwards, it doesn't go that bad to the full extent. But that doesn't mean a lot. Most of the enterprise Java code out there is based on Java 8, and all these versions are vulnerable. So nevertheless, I personally said I don't even want to discuss anything like, is this vulnerable or not? We supply the patch, and if we all drink more coffee and do this through the night, patch has to go out no matter what. And I think this is something that I have learned is extremely important, because even if you are absolutely sure that with the so-called unpatched version, you are not vulnerable, there might be still something that you don't read about, right? That maybe somebody knows, yeah, of course, maybe the main RCE, remote code exploit, doesn't work, execution doesn't work, but there might still be something else, how you can go this. So I say immediate patch as soon as possible.
So I moved here.
I would add that, well, first of all, Stratodesk was very, very fast in getting patches out. So kudos to Stratodesk and the folks there to address this very, very quickly. Going back also very briefly to another point you made, Emanuel, opening ports more than necessary is, of course, never a very good idea. And unfortunately, so many systems come with the default of having a number of ports open. One way, of course, around part of this is to use tunneling mechanisms by which you can redirect what normally would go through a certain port to go through your 443 secure port, for example. And obviously, and we'll probably touch on this later too, having an ADC or some other pre-entry point for people coming through or into your organization that can sort out, what is allowed and where it comes from and under what circumstances is also important. And the one other thing I should point out is I remember many, many years ago when web servers were constantly being attacked, looking either for vulnerabilities, sometimes DOS or DDoS attacks, etc. That Apache, for example, was really pretty good about providing various modules that could be added on that had the ability to, search for things such as, malicious strings or certain types of characters, or for multiple accesses from unknown attackers who, would just, beat on the system in the hopes of getting in. And this of course raises, again, the issue that security is ubiquitous. Just like the old proverb, the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. You have to really look at everything from the server side, from the middleware side, from storage, from networking, all the way to the endpoint, and not neglect any of these features in understanding and dealing with the security of your systems.
Yeah, that is a very good point. I think we will come back to that a few times, even during the remainder of our talk. The weakest link. Security is always about thinking, what is my weakest link? And it's sometimes, you know, sometimes people might dismiss things. So for example, social engineering, yeah, you might be able, and you might say, okay, I cannot deal, I'm an engineer, I cannot deal with social engineering. That is an HR problem. HR needs to vet people who should get access to our facilities, and who has what kind of password access. So as a system admin, I cannot decide, is one VP is less worth than another. No, I get a scheme and I say these are the roles that people have. But you know, social engineering can be a great entry door into your network. And then it really depends, what can this attacker do with what they got from social engineering. And if I then find if they then find my unpatched Java servers that have Log4Shell, I make it very, very easy for them. So, I mean, not singling out any large companies, but think about how much work, say, a company like Google has to do on that sort. I mean, if you have tens of thousands of employees, what is the percentage of people with a gambling problem, just out of ordinary people out there? I don't know what the actual percentage is, but if you have a company with say 50,000 employees, chances are you have employees in your ranks, no matter how good your HR and your vetting is, who might potentially have a gambling problem. And you know, if somebody finds that out and sees, okay, this person needs money, you can potentially exploit that weakness. And certainly, question is, how far can you then go? And yeah,
and to your point, let me just interject quickly. This is why remote access to desktop machines, you know, becomes so critical, because the fact that an individual can access remotely a machine within the company means that somebody probably is going to make a mistake along the way, which of course then can lead to an infiltration of machines within the company. And once somebody, you know, is within the network, within the company, then all hell can break loose.
Absolutely. And so this is actually, you know, I'm not qualified to talk about social engineering or gambling problems or anything, but what concerns me personally, and what concerns Stratodesk is certainly the endpoint security in this hybrid work scenario. Hybrid work means people got machines, let's say not even running in a thin client scenario. Companies scrambled to buy cheap laptops for their employees to allow them to work from home. So there have been probably millions of chip shortage, yes or no, but there have been millions of these devices probably sold, cheap machines. These machines are now all being operated in users' homes. And a user's home, it is not necessarily a friendly environment. So I personally treat my own network kind of a bit like the front yard. And so certainly I have segmented the network, but the core of the network, I treat it like the front yard. Yes, it is kind of mine, but if somebody steps on your front yard, it's not really trespassing. Right? People could have reasons to go there. And thinking of what kind of connected devices are in my network, I have actually now started to throw devices out. So when I found it extremely cool, you know, this new microwave, the drawer microwave, using the app, I can open the drawer from the microwave. But then after a few days, I thought, what is the point? Why would I be somewhere remote and open and open the drawer. There is no point to that. I need the microwave when I'm right in front of it, yeah, because I need to heat something up. But just for this benefit, quote unquote benefit, to be able to open the drawer, that means there is some kind of microcontroller or some system with an IP address that is permanently on my network, permanently talking to some sort of cloud server, where I don't even know what is that kind of cloud server. This thing can be weaponized, because all these little things you find in your network, they can run attack code. They can permanently scan my home network within the firewall. So I have garage door openers. I have my pool control is internet based. Printers, obviously. I mean, these have been entry doors for hacking for ages. Then the pool control is actually pretty cool. That's an ESP type microcontroller. So at least from the way it behaves and how it identifies itself. If you don't know these ESPs, this is great. This is really a geek's dream. It's smaller than a Raspberry Pi, but you can put your firmware on it. You can do it's already made. You don't even need to code for these LED light strips and so on. Very, very cool. But if this is under the control of say your pool manufacturer or the manufacturer of your fridge, I don't know how often they update this. I have no idea. They don't tell me. So that means imagine I run my PC that I got from my company, and this PC is here in my network and is permanently being hacked by all those things. And so the answer is, I guess I am capable of dealing with these things. Yeah, I can certainly segment stuff. I can switch things to run my own stuff. Obviously I'm using Z-Wave and Zigbee for the important stuff. I'm throwing all that cloud stuff out or not using it as. But how would you tell this to your average employee? If you have a company with 10,000 employees, how will you tell them that they should remove your Genie connected garage door opener that they got for $59 on Amazon or with a gift card? So that means you are placing your company property in a very hostile environment. And I guess here we are, as Tobias said, endpoint security is getting more and more important.
Right, and your point about printers, this has been an issue for a long time, both in terms of using printers to exploit things, but also as remote storage devices, ironically. The other thing that's, I think, very critical is, and I hate to say it, but I think the industry, by and large, is greatly at fault for delivering devices that are so poorly protected to start with, in the interest of making it, quote unquote, easy for users to integrate, these devices into their systems. But to your point, Emanuel, as well, unless you're pretty good at IT and networking and security and so forth, the vast majority of people are not going to have the knowledge or the patience to review all of these devices and undertake what it takes to secure them to some degree, let alone, do things like you and others have done, namely, segmenting the network so that your home devices are on a completely different local area network, say, than whatever is related to your work. But addressing some of the things on the slide here, again, to what you mentioned earlier about cheap endpoint devices, is that in order to conduct good company business now, in particular, since so many people have been forced to or have been given the opportunity, in many cases, to work from home or remotely, that with an inadequately powered device, you're going to run into the difficulty of not being able to do video conferences well, to run remote software that requires a high degree of processing power, either on the CPU or the GPU level. I keep reading about all these really, interesting AI types of things that are now being built in, which of course require a lot of processing power one way or the other. And, to the last point there, some of us are discovering that machines that we bought maybe only a couple of years ago are, for example, not even compatible with being able to run Windows 11 now. And so you're stuck with having made, as the old saying goes, penny wise, pound foolish, that you save money initially by buying a cheap device, only to discover not that long later on that it is not going to be able to fulfill the needs of your employees or your company.
Yeah. So that is a great point. In fact, now I'm thinking this was one of the first things I experienced when we sort of made that mental switch. So I need to explain, what do I mean by that? So traditionally, I've been more this minimalistic person. Yeah, the fewer things you add, the better. And, we could have probably a 1 hour discussion just on the fact, do we need antivirus on a thin client? Yes or no? Because, what if somebody plugs in a USB stick, but it's not red and blah, blah, blah. So this is its own discussion. But so the need is definitely there for this kind of endpoint security. We have, what I can tell from experience, I mean, this is tech talk generally about security. Maybe we make one specifically about and with Sentry Bay. So Sentry Bay is a company that has exactly that kind of software solution, and this is really cool. So from an operating system perspective, the system starts up. And once it loads the Sentry Bay component very, very early on startup, subsequent software has to go through that. So in Linux, there are specific mechanisms how you can do that. In kind of in layman's term, when a piece of software like the Citrix receiver or the VMware Horizon client or a local browser just wants to open a file or a network socket to some other machine, this has to go through the Sentry Bay software. And so whatever Sentry Bay's magic is that they do, this is their secret sauce, their intellectual property, the value they provide. Whatever they do, they have the ability to filter, to learn from it using AI methods. They are the ones who then potentially can cut off something like a log4shell. Imagine this thing sees suddenly for the first time your Java code, if you have that kind of log4shell based scenario, downloading something from a server you have never downloaded before. It could just block it, it could alert you to it. So there are ways how it can react. Otherwise, if you don't have that, you won't even see it, unless you run network sniffers of some sort. So there is definitely value to that, especially because the moment I say network sniffer, I know somebody in the audience says, but my firewall is logging everything. My firewall is logging everything, but not in your users' homes. That they got, again, keep in mind, they got their machines, they are running this behind their Comcast router. So that means you don't have any network access there. So apart from that, though, I still say the more minimal the better. So certainly you don't want any unwanted third-party applications. That is a great use case for a thin device, for something like what we have, no touch, because you cannot install Angry Birds there no matter what. Yeah, you just can't. And disk encryption, certainly even in a thin client scenario, has a point. If you think why why disk encryption, of course there are things on a thin client, and even if it is just your Wi-Fi credential, if it's not something you want to type in all the time, it's always like you can do whatever kind of security you want. I tell you, at some point you will have an executive in a company who says, I do not want to type in my password. So you have to store it somehow, but how will you store it? You encrypt it, but then the encryption also needs a password. So this goes on and on. But what I'm saying is, whatever we, the geeks, think what we can do in terms of security, there will at some point be a very powerful person in any organization who prefers comfort and ease of use over our mechanisms. And so this is why we have all these things to accommodate kind of both user feel well and security.
I can't even imagine how many passwords have been written on sticky notes.
Yes.
and put under the keyboard or on the back side of the keyboard or something. I mean, it sounds ludicrous, but this, unfortunately, and similar types of things happen all the time.
Yeah, so this is wow, this is kind of a controversial issue. I promise everyone we will not get into a fight, but Tobias, maybe I should let you talk about the case for VPN or not VPN.
Okay, well, this is almost a religious issue. There are certainly both proponents and those who advocate very strongly against VPNs. VPNs are relatively easy to implement. They provide rudimentary access control, but they're also not the most secure things in the world. There are various IP and DNS injection issues that are involved. There are, in some cases, blacklistings so that certain people cannot either make use of them or be able to access certain areas on the web because of their limitation. And so, you're kind of stuck with the dilemma: how do you regulate, access to your company in a secure manner with a certain degree of security, and yet not make it so incredibly, difficult or expensive. I mean, there are certainly other solutions, as mentioned below, access delivery controllers, such as Citrix ADC, which previously was known as NetScaler, F5, and so on and so forth, which are, complicated, expensive devices and require a lot of upkeep and management on the part of the company. So again, it's not just the initial cost, but the fact that you need, a skilled set of individuals who have the ability to configure and maintain these more complicated devices.
Yeah, that's right. I'm from Austria, but in this case, I really want to be Switzerland, very neutral. So there are different VPNs, and so from a Stratodesk perspective, we certainly support different VPN clients on the endpoint. But also, if you don't want any sort of VPN, So the things I see with VPNs most likely are login challenges, you know, in the sense of users having to type in something. Again, here we are, usability versus security. But apart from that, we have certainly we need to support it. Yeah, there's no way out. So here we are, sort of Switzerland. But anything, I hope that is not going too far when I say this, but anything as on the endpoint, again, one software module less is certainly appreciated. One dialog box for less for the user is certainly appreciated. This is where we are. The user experience kills everything, right? If people say they don't want to do this, again, you can do whatever you want. Inner VPN, outer VPN. We have seen such setups, yeah? 2 VPNs. Once you have the outer VPN, you can join the inner VPN and then you start your Citrix client. This is certainly way more secure than anything else, but you need, this is a user, I would even go as far as saying it's not even a usability issue, it's a user education issue. But sometimes I wonder why people don't value, say, their own property, right? I mean, there are plenty of people who don't lock your car, who don't lock their cars, or even don't lock their houses. And I'm very honest, sometimes when I go running and nobody is there, I might potentially not even lock it. But for my data, certainly I would not do that. Data, I want it to be totally secure as much as possible. Nothing is total.
I think it's really, you know, the job of management to instill in their users that, you know, as you said earlier, the internet and the computing environment really has become a wild west of sorts, and the only way to maintain any kind of security and order is, I'm afraid, to have certain, perhaps more draconian measures imposed upon users, because if you're putting the security and integrity of your company at risk by not adhering to certain standards, then the ramifications and possible outcomes that will hurt the company tremendously are enormous. And I would certainly hope that in light of so many vulnerabilities and incidents with ransomware and hacking and denial of service and, you know, loss of services, that people will become more aware and more agreeable to having more of these restrictions imposed.
Yeah. And especially if you put these restrictions into a way where people can easily stomach it, right? So where I'm going to, as a longtime VDI advocate, one of the most of the worst inhibitors of VDI adoption, say 10 years ago, was users' desire, especially, again, powerful users, executives, vice presidents, and such, powerful, or even directors, powerful users who simply refuse to work with a thin client because they want to have the shiniest and most powerful and latest Pentium, whatever processor. And they thought the thin client is something for the low class, the low caste worker, and they want to have the most powerful machine, when in fact I would have said, hey, this is the most elegant thing. I want the smallest thing, the thing that doesn't make any noise. But this was, I remember these days 10 years ago, it was kind of, but then, you know, customers tell me, yeah, you know how this is, the powerful users, they want their big fat PC, dual core, Celeron. you know, you remember these times. And so I guess now with the security, it is probably easier to tell people, no, this is actually good for you. This creates fewer issues that you otherwise suffer from. If you have an outage, you whatever cannot do your work, somebody else might do your work, whatever. This keeps you going. It's lean, it's thin, and well, no open ports, endpoint security installed, and in today's age, see, if I am confronted with some kind of a thin VDI endpoint for work, I don't care. I have my private devices, right? Everyone has some sort of phablet, smartphone, tablet. You don't need your work PC for Facebook. You rather want this to be a little small capsule that runs in your homework. And also, by the way, this is something, I don't know if this is underrated or underrepresented. It goes both ways, right? Because if I get something from my employer that then runs in my home network, how can I be sure that the hacking is not going the other way? It could be the employer's machine, not the employer's fault. Yeah, it could be some third party abusing the employer's machines to actually try to hack into my home network. Sure, you might say, why would anyone want to hack my Philips Hue bridge or anything from my employer's machine? But you know, ransomware doesn't know a reason. For example, there's a reason. It's money. So money and data, and I think people have to go into this mindset that even these things can be both ways.
I think one of the biggest struggles has been for a long time the control over what particular individual applications the user has the ability to install on their device. And this is this is an ongoing issue. Of course, if you only lock down your operating system with basics and require, for example, applications to be run remotely one way or another, either on servers that provide access to those applications, which can both be on premises or in the cloud. Thereby, of course, you can very strictly control all of the applications that users have access to. But there are always going to be people who say, oh, I really like this particular application, and I'm not happy that I don't have the ability to install it on my own machine. Why are you being so restrictive? And this is the ongoing battle between end users and the IT administrators.
So I guess we are at the point where we can open up if there are any questions.
Yes, Emanuel, Tobias, thank you so much both for everything. We'll give it, I guess, 3 more minutes, or we can go over time a little bit if there are any questions in general about security or about what we're doing at Stratodesk with Notas OS and Notas Center. So if there are any questions, please feel free to type them in chat and we'll be more than happy to answer.
So I saw one question about if I don't have any smart home devices in private use. Well, yeah, I said I stopped the microwave from being a smart microwave and dumped it down to a normal microwave. That is correct, but certainly there are plenty of smart home devices. But I'm struggling with that, with the thought. And so recently, I got a quote for a new air conditioner. So ours is kind of getting old at some point. So I was thinking about replacing. Yeah, this thing comes with its own thermostat. And certainly a brand name US-based air conditioning manufacturer has its own Wi-Fi based thermostat. And I asked the person, does it need internet? And they said, yeah, occasionally it does do firmware updates, but why would you not want internet? Because you want to control it from your phone, right? Yeah, but this is again, this is not even Nest, or when you say, okay, I would trust Google because it's the largest company and whatever, and they have your data anyway. This is not even Nest. This is something that some company who has been doing air conditions for 100 years has suddenly potentially contracted somebody abroad to make them a very nice smart thermostat. Do I really want this in my home? I don't, honestly, the answer is actually no. So it's difficult. Would I want to throw out my Sonos? No, I love it.
Well, or just, Google Home or Amazon Echo. I mean, these are exceedingly powerful devices which have the ability, as we all know, to tap into many, many things within our home. And yet at the same time, obviously, there are some significant privacy concerns. I mean, I love our, Amazon Echo. Alexa is often tapped into to play music or find out about all kinds of things and so forth. But I'm also very careful to mute it so that it's not listening to me, because there's plenty of evidence that pieces of information are not just coming out of it, but going back into it. And so, this is a big concern. And as Carl just mentioned, one of the other big concerns is, and you mentioned this also earlier, Emanuel, that a lot of IoT devices are provided in a very, very basic state. The firmware is probably pretty rudimentary. And if some kind of vulnerability does appear, one either would not even be aware of it at all, or the company might not be aware of it at all. And even if they were aware of it and you were aware of it, there's a good chance that they're not going to do anything to be able to provide, any kind of an update.
Yeah.
So
because I also
how would you even know, first of all, if it's invulnerable or not? And then secondly, if it is, pretty much your only recourse is to either live with the risk or to throw it out and replace it with something else. And then you get into exactly the same situation again and again.
Yeah, so I guess maybe a few people got me wrong, because I got this question. I said, no, the person said no internet on IoT devices, no updates, becomes vulnerable. Yes, so I don't question the value for updates. When I said I don't want it, I didn't mean the device to be connected. I don't want the device as a whole. I want an old school thermostat that has no IP address and nothing, and is not even smart. I don't know if I will go that far. Certainly there are other members of my household, my wife, who have a say in that. But this is something that makes me feel very uncomfortable. Yeah? Things like a proprietary thermostat, no matter how much you like the vendor or the company, because you don't know how serious they take the security. So one other question that I saw was the PWN kit, and where we affected, that was the starter of 2022. This the software module in question is POL-kit. And very, very, very good. We were not affected at all by that. And this is, this is a longer discussion probably. But see, even if you have software modules out there that might potentially be vulnerable, conservative default settings, disable everything you don't need. And so this is for us, for this thing to actually work, it needs a so-called setuid bit. So that means that you can run a process, a Linux or Unix process as a user, but it can then it will be elevated to root, to administrator privileges. If you don't have that S bit, that cannot happen. So we call it at setuid or S bit. And so, we assign this S bit only if we really, really need that functionality. And on a thin client, we don't need the specifics of POL-kit, so we did not assign the S bit. And as such, there is zero vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one other question that cropped up which is a topic very dear to my heart because of working with you folks and with Citrix over quite a number of years, is the potential of the Raspberry Pi as an endpoint that is, capable of video conferencing and so forth. I really think, the evolution of the Pi going from its modest beginnings to something that's, over 10 times as powerful now, with the Pi 4 as the original unit. Maybe that's something that you can address, Emanuel,
Yes.
in terms of the usefulness of the Raspberry Pi as a viable endpoint.
Yes, no, actually, that opens a much broader discussion. Raspberry Pi, or let's put it that way. See, NoTouch has been created as a software-only product, kind of in a hardware market. I remember 10 years ago, people were really looking at me at trade shows. What, you're a software company in a hardware market? That is kind of weird. I buy thin clients. What would I do with your software only? So obviously the use case for PC repurposing or PC conversion has grown then a lot, but it has its challenges, right? Because there are some machines that are not compatible. Some machines can do certain things that others can't, which is sometimes difficult from outside from outside or from just by looking at the machine to see. So there is certainly a use case for selling or for getting clients or devices with NoTouch OS pre-installed. And the Raspberry Pi was kind of the first thing in our evolution. I mean, was it 2016 or 17 when this came out? So this is terrible, another 5 years, right? I mean, more gray hair. So this came out some five years or more ago. And what we are now doing is establishing more and more relationships with hardware providers to actually get machines with NoTouch already pre-installed. Also because we see that people are replacing hardware, not just refreshing hardware, but replacing, because there might be use cases where you can run a 5-7-year-old hardware perfectly as a thin client, but then the power supply is burning down, or maybe a new VMware Horizon client needs certain multimedia capabilities that the old machine doesn't have. So if you go down deep in the technology, you see all sorts of things. Yeah, some chipsets that claim to be H.264 capable, and then you only see a black window. Yeah, you need to switch back to software fallback, which happens to work well, and then it works. So there are all sorts of things. So I guess to answer that specific question, so yes, so we have some options. Some are in the pipeline. We very soon. I will take a note. We will let you know.
I would like to add that, and I'll try and find the article and post it, but there was a recent article within the last month or so from Mohammed Dawood at Citrix about some of the amazing improvements they've made to the HDX protocol, which allows for significantly better video rates. And it's funny because when the Pi first came out, one of my very first thoughts was, okay, well, this is early in the game, but I was very convinced that over time it would evolve to become something very viable as an end client unit with amazing capabilities. And I think if it's not perhaps quite there, I think it's already getting very, very close. But I'll try and find that that link and post it on the chat room here.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So I guess we should conclude. We are now 10 minutes later than we thought. Thanks everyone for staying on. Thanks everyone for signing up. We will do more of these talks. So we will keep you all posted.
In the meantime, feel free to connect with Tobias directly on social networks and with Emanuel and with Stratodesk official accounts to get the latest news and updates when it comes to security and everything else. But yeah, the link is now in the chat from Tobias. So I'll just give it a few more seconds for people to click on it, and then I'll go ahead and close this meeting.
And let me just say thank you so much, Emanuel and Mensur, for the invitation. It's always a pleasure touching bases with the user community, which has been overall very dear to me in various capacities. And I really appreciate this opportunity to be able to make some sort of a small contribution. And I think Stratodesk is doing some great, amazing stuff. And I really very much enjoyed the opportunity to be able to contribute here. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tobias. Thank you so much for being on with us.
Yes.
Yeah, bye-bye. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, great evening, wherever you are from. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, stay in touch all. Nice
Bye-bye.
to see you. Take care. Bye-bye.